We are diving today into a contradiction so profound, it almost reads like a Gilded Age spy novel.
Hmm.
But every bit of it is true.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the celebrated American scientist, Clarence King, who at the absolute peak of his career was also living a second secret life.
As a black Pullman porter named James Todd.
Right, just across town.
It is, it's truly one of the most staggering deceptions in American history, and the context here is so important.
Yeah.
King was not some, obscure eccentric. He was a celebrity geologist. He was the founder and first director of the U.S. Geological Survey, a best-selling author.
He moved in the absolute highest social and political circles.
Oh, absolutely. In Manhattan, in Washington, D.C.
That's the key, right? This wasn't happening in a vacuum. He was dining with and was, close friends with people like Henry
The
Adams
great-grandson of a U.S. president.
and John Hay, who had been Lincoln's private secretary and later became Secretary of State. I mean, this man was at the very center of American power.
And yet he chose to adopt an identity that put him at the very bottom of the social hierarchy.
It's just unbelievable.
Exactly. And that is why this story is such a perfect candidate for a deep dive. The source material, Martha Sandweiss's book, Passing Strange, it argues that King's tale sheds light on something way bigger than just one man's lie.
Right.
It shows just how fluid, how complicated, and honestly, how legally contradictory American ideas about race and identity really were back then.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We're going to unpack the terrifying logistics of this double life, explore why King's decision to pass as black was so historically unusual, and, I think most importantly, connect his personal lie to the strange, shifting, and ultimately paradoxical official race laws that America was built on.
Let's unpack this by starting with the woman at the center of it all, who knew him only as James Todd, Ada Copeland.
Right.
She was an African-American woman born in Georgia just before the Civil War. And like a lot of people looking for opportunity, she moved north, arrived in New York City in the mid-1880s.
And in New York, she meets this man, James Todd.
Yep.
He's described as handsome, charismatic, very light-skinned. And for the time, James held what would have been a really good job for a black man.
A position of pride, really. A Pullman porter.
Pullman porter. They get married, settle in Brooklyn, and over time, they have 5 children.
So on the surface, this looks like a secure, respectable black family building a life.
But every single piece of that identity was a fabrication.
Every piece. James Todd was not black, he was not a porter, and his real name wasn't James Todd, it was Clarence King.
Let's just pause on that choice of identity for a second. A Pullman porter. That feels very specific, very strategic.
Oh, it was an ingenious cover.
Yeah.
Pullman porters were. They were famous, they were kind of the elite of black labor, they traveled the country, they were highly professional.
So it gave him an excuse to be gone.
It gave him the perfect alibi. It was this respected, mobile identity that explained why he'd have to disappear from his white life for long stretches. Just brilliant, in a way.
This is where the sheer logistical absurdity of it all just sinks in. I mean, you have to imagine the routine.
Yeah.
In Manhattan, Clarence King is the toast of the town. The leading scientist, the witty speaker at the all-white Century Club.
Operating in this world of wealth and intellectual power.
And then he sheds his suit for a quarters coat.
Exactly. He crosses the Brooklyn Bridge, which isn't just a physical distance, it's this enormous leap across the color line to go home to Ada and his kids, where he's just the black man, James Todd.
The psychological weight of that, for years, it's incomprehensible.
I mean, how could that possibly hold up? What was his excuse for having money or his education or
why none of his fancy Manhattan friends ever came over for dinner.
Well, this is where the research suggests Ada's.
Yep.
Her not knowing was absolutely essential. The whole thing would have collapsed otherwise.
Why, though? How?
If you think about the social realities, marrying a white man, especially a wealthy one, would have made Ada a social pariah. Instantly.
To both communities.
To both communities. White society would have rejected her, and often black society rejected women who crossed the line back then.
So for Ada, marrying a very light-skinned black man with a good job, even if he was a bit mysterious, that was actually the safer path.
Precisely. It was a step up, it was socially acceptable in her world, and it gave her security without all the legal and social danger.
And we have that amazing piece of anecdotal evidence from 1900.
The party, yes.
She hosted this big party at their house, and it was actually covered in detail by the black press.
Which is just a phenomenal detail. You would not invite that level of public scrutiny letting reporters into your home if you thought for a second your husband was actually a famous white man.
No way. It shows she felt totally secure in their identity as a black family.
And the irony is just perfect.
Yeah.
The party she hosted to celebrate their social standing was a masquerade.
It was literally a masquerade.
And if her husband, James Todd Clarence King, was there, he was, quite literally, wearing a professional, a racial, and a social mask.
So that personal deception leads us right into the societal one. Because to understand why a man like King would choose to pass as black, you have to understand that the whole legal idea of race was, well, it was kind of breaking down.
Absolutely. After the Civil War, you have the freedom of 4 million formerly enslaved people. And for the Southern power structure, that created this immediate, profound crisis.
How do we maintain white supremacy?
That's the question. How do we keep black people in their place? The anxiety was intense.
And the answer was to turn race into this rigid legal weapon, right? To enforce Jim Crow.
Yes. They started introducing laws to fix identity, specifically targeting anyone who might look white but had any African ancestry. This is where you get rules like the infamous 1/8 rule.
So if even one of your 8 great-grandparents was black.
You were legally black, period. It didn't matter what you looked like.
What's so fascinating, though, is that in creating these super specific fractional race laws, which were meant to be totally rigid, they actually created this huge paradox.
A huge one. The laws, designed to restrict and contain, inadvertently made racial designation, well, strangely fluid.
Oh, so?
Because the legal definition was all about a fraction of ancestry, not about your actual appearance. So it created this bizarre loophole.
Right.
It meant a man like Clarence King, light complexion, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, with 0 African ancestry, could just choose to claim it socially. The law couldn't really disprove him because it was focused on this weird political math.
It just reveals the absurdity of the whole system. If the government is so obsessed with a fraction, then the designation itself becomes arbitrary. It's just paperwork.
And that's the central insight here. King's choice to pass as black was the exception that proves the rule about all this racial anxiety. Because, passing usually meant someone of African descent trying to be counted as white for more opportunities.
He did the exact opposite. He already had every privilege imaginable.
He was moving into a legally restricted identity. It shows he knew how fragile the whole system was. He was basically exploiting the very definitions that were meant to oppress.
And this chaos of identity, it didn't just end with him. It played out in the lives of his 5 kids.
Oh, absolutely. The official paperwork they generated over their lives, it's like a timeline of America's shifting anxieties about race.
So how volatile was it? I mean, what do we see when we track their records?
The instability is just shocking. You have 2 of the King Todd daughters who go on to marry white men. They were socially accepted as white. They even testified on legal documents that their sister was white.
Okay, so they're white.
Right. But their brothers, when they registered for the draft during World War I,
Let me guess.
they were assigned directly to all-black Jim Crow regiments.
So siblings from the same parents are simultaneously defined as white for marriage and legally black for military service.
Precisely. And then at other times, while living with their mom in Brooklyn, they were all officially classified as mulatto. It just shows that your race depended entirely on who was asking and why.
Which brings us to the U.S. Census itself. This is where you can see the government just desperately trying to nail this down.
The census data is the hard proof. You look at the 1880 census, right at the height of Jim Crow efforts. The government had these incredibly granular categories.
Not just black or white.
No. You could be designated white, black, or these very specific intermediate terms, mulatto, quadroon, or octoroon.
Why? Why get that specific? Mulatto is half, quadroon is a quarter.
Octoroon is 1/8. They were obsessed with fractions of black blood. By creating these categories, the government was trying to legally define who, despite looking white, was still black enough to be restricted from voting or owning property or going to white schools.
It was a tool of control.
A tool of social control designed to prevent exactly the kind of fluidity King was using.
But then, just a decade later, 1890, those categories vanished.
They snapped shut. Suddenly you were just white or black.
Why the change?
The political goal shifted. Once Jim Crow was firmly in place, they didn't need the complex fractions anymore. A simple binary black or white was much more effective for enforcing rigid segregation everywhere.
And that rigidity, it lasted for a long, long time. The census would not allow anyone to identify as mixed race between 1930 and the year 2000.
70 years.
70 years, where the government basically denied that mixed-race people existed, officially.
Which means that all these debates we think of as modern, about mixed-race identity and consciousness, they're not new at all. They're continuation of this very old political fight over who gets to define us.
And this all brings us back to Clarence King, because his lie, maybe it wasn't just a simple deception. Maybe it was tied to this genuinely radical belief he had about America's future.
Sandweiss calls him a racial radical for his time, which is just, it's remarkable for an elite white scientist in the 1880s. He wasn't just observing things. He had a profound vision.
What was that vision?
He wrote pretty extensively and imagined this American future where the composite elements of American populations are melted down into one race alloy.
Wow.
He truly believed that the mixing of races was, and this is his phrase, the hope of America.
A view that almost no one shared in the 1880s. That was incredibly controversial.
Extremely. So he was literally living out that radical belief in secret across the Brooklyn Bridge. His private life was an attempt to realize a philosophy that the rest of society completely rejected.
So if we connect all these dots, King's life, this astonishing lie, it inadvertently exposed a fundamental truth, didn't it? That pinning down what race even is has always been difficult. It was never just about what you look like. It was defined by political anxiety, by restrictive laws, and ultimately by personal choice and deception.
Exactly. The story of Clarence King and James Todd shows us that the state's attempts to impose certainty, first with all those fractions, then with the rigid binary, they were always doomed to fail. Because human life and choice will always outpace the official paperwork.
Race became this social label that just changed and adapted to whatever the political needs and fears of the moment were.
Leading to the absolute absurdity of a powerful white man being able to legally claim a black identity. And of course, we're still wrestling with these categories and anxieties today.
Which leads us to our closing thought for you to explore. Clarence King believed, back in the 1880s, that America would eventually melt into one defined American race alloy. He saw mixed race as the nation's only hope. So considering that the U.S. Census spent 70 years actively refusing to let people identify as mixed race, what does it mean that our contemporary society has finally embraced this identification? Does the acceptance of mixed race categories today represent some kind of delayed realization of King's century-old vision, or are we just using new boxes to manage the same old anxieties? Something to consider as you process this deep dive.